Movie notes on Denial, 2016 film, 31 May 2024 viewing, getting it in the 5th month of this year, 2024. Today's Friday, 31 May 2024. Just finished watching this movie, Denial, 2016 film. I'm Tanis Coralee Leonhardi, she, her, hers of Seattle. These are my movie notes from this viewing. So, my description for this viewing is a biographical film about a woman defending the authenticity of the Holocaust/World War II and her response to a man who challenges the existence of happenings during the Holocaust/World War II. It is a film adaptation of a 2000 book by Deborah Lipstadt. I think the book has a different name than the movie. But it's, so the book was 2005 and the movie's 2016, so over a decade between the publishing of the book and the publishing of the movie, so to speak, though each takes time to construct. So there we go. And do I have notes on it? Well, I'm thinking through, sometimes my videos they're copyright checks run, so I don't want to have the same talking points as other people. So when people wonder sometimes why I bring myself up or life scenarios up or my experience up, it's a way of being like, because I'm speaking about myself in addition to the movie, if somebody says what I say, then they're copyright, like, infringement on me, not the other way around. So sometimes I include personal stuff for that reason. Okay, so let's do a little bit of context here. World War II happened on planet Earth, the original, in the 1930s/1940s. And in terms of the context of this movie, there's something called a concentration camp, which is not to be confused with like modern day, like boot camp, coding camp type of concentration camps where people go into a room and they all like write together or code together or stuff like that. Now, concentration camp wasn't like, everybody look at your computer screen. It was like everybody gets locked in a certain location. But not everybody. It was 3 groups. Practitioners of Judaism, homosexuals, and people of Polish ancestry. And so, personally, for myself, of those 3 categories, I have an aunt who is a homosexual, and I am of Polish ancestry. So when a movie like this comes along and talks only about 1/3 of the groups, not necessarily percentages of people in the camp, but 1/3 of the groups that were targeted and put into concentration camps, this is adding a little person context. It always comes across as distorting because they paint it as like they were the only victims, and I'm like, well, 2/3 of the groups got left out, and the 2/3 of the groups that are relevant for me, Tanis Coralee Leonhardi, she, her, hers of Seattle, got left out. And so there's that. So a concentration camp is physical restraint of individuals by a militia. There we go. Okay. I mean, like, if I'm trying to abstract it most generally, like, there's a militia, and they take these people, and they put them into a place, physically, like, in a compound, and then they're not allowed out. Okay, so it's physical restraint of individuals. Something I thought the movie did, and literature and television and films and stuff don't necessarily do the best job of, in regards to stuff like this. The people really, like, are negativity fixated, and like, these people were treated the worst of all people in history, and yada yada yada. And I'm like reading, you know, like this book, and I'm like, clearly you have never heard of the continent of Africa, right? 1, and that's as somebody, right? 2 of the groups that are relevant for me were represented in concentration camps. So it's kind of racist to make that kind of claim. It doesn't take into account the true diversity of crimes committed on planet Earth, the original 1. 2, if you want to try and convince people of that argument, don't jump to death. Provide what life was like. And this movie did not do a good job of that. Though I'm going to say, as of current in my lifetime, and I was born in approximately 1993, things that cover the Holocaust/World War II do not do a good job of that, and I have actually found that very, very frustrating, is what was normal life like, right? What was daily life like during the war? Because, right, a person who's in a concentration camp and physically, like, bound to this compound, who goes about their daily tasks, and not once is touched by, say, somebody of the opposite gender, has had a much more luxurious life than the German girl who gets raped every Wednesday by somebody from the militia of her own country. Right? So there's, in that sense, there's a little bit of, like, imbalance in terms of, like, the actual, like, what people experienced. Right? It's kind of distorted, very strongly distorted, and it's not the responsibility of this movie to provide this balance, right? They focus only on one of those three groups put into concentration camps, but it kind of paints it as like everything, and it's just kind of like, there were three groups and everybody suffered. That's why it's called a world war, right? There were deaths, not for one group of people, but a bunch of groups of people. So it's just, and I don't know if that happens when something becomes far enough away, like it happened long enough ago, that people just kind of like start to drift away from like the reality of the situation of like a bunch of people died and a bunch of even more people suffered. And that just gets like, no, these people, you know, one-uppers go, these were the people that suffered the most. And I was like, and the other two groups in that concentration camp, where is their representation? There is none. Omission is a legal crime. Or no, omission is a legal action. It can actually be acted upon in a court of law. All right. So there's that kind of stuff where I'm just kind of like, good for upholding the authenticity. However, if we want a representation of the war itself, focusing only on one group of people is not, like, it's not the whole story. Okay. But this movie's not necessarily about that. Okay. And so essentially somebody comes along and is like, they focus on the death thing, right? I find that, there's another way of putting this. Where am I going with all this? If they had focused on the life part of people in the concentration camps, this might not have ever happened. This person questioning it, right? The guy who comes along and is like, the killings didn't happen. He's saying the killings didn't happen. If maybe there had been some sort of structure provided as to there were survivors, right? Not everybody died. It's not like it was the genocide in Burundi. You know, like survival rates were much higher than a lot of, well, and I guess that's like hindsight bias because that was the 1990s, so things are like a lot worse in the world ever more recently, at least in Africa. But again, the book was 2005 and the movie's 2016. So when did the trial happen? But the guy had a kid who was like in the 1990s, so they should have known about the genocide that happened in Africa. Well, multiple genocides that happened in Africa. Do you see where I'm going with this? Right? Like, if they had, getting back to the point, if they'd focused on life instead of death and like properly contextualizing the death in terms of what life was like and that there were survivors, they might not have been attacked. I have found the people, the assholes who like to deny things just for the sake of denying things to be an asshole, they tend to not attack, or at least not attack with such intensity when the true story is highlighted in equal proportions. Right? So if somebody only talks about death, they're not representing reality, right? There was life. In fact, to have death, there has to be life, right? So in that sense, was this something that the woman should have been able to see coming? Yes, right? Provide the full picture of the people who were in the camps, right? It does them no service, like justice, if you just focus on them as some statistic for their death rates. It's humanizing. So I guess it was just a way of saying, I don't like, there was mistreatment of the people who suffered from both sides, from my perspective. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. But it's a good movie, right? It communicated that clearly. They didn't tamper with it in the sense of like, that so far as I'm aware, that was not a critique of this movie that I have come across of it distorting the lives being portrayed here. So in the sense, it was like, maybe at some time there will be more proportional coverage in the hate, in the, you know, polarities we see. Go a little bit towards the center of like not being so polarized and being able to communicate, because a more representative picture starts to be covered by people, which is a lot of work. And I get it. That's a lot of work. And that's not necessarily what gets the headlines or gets the big paychecks and stuff like that. But, you know, if we want to go for a truth market instead of like a bear or a bull market, maybe truth can start to be incorporated. So there we go. Those are my movie notes on Denial, 2016 film, 31 May 2024 viewing.